66 books, 40 different authors from 3 different continents who wrote in 3 different languages. They were shepherds, kings, scholars, fishermen, prophets, a general, a cupbearer, and a priest. All of this combined together in one book with one central purpose, with one grand narrative. So what if we told you that there is a common thread all throughout the Bible? And that's that Jesus is on display in every story, from beginning to end, from cover to cover.
What's up, guys? Thank you for joining us for another week of Wednesday Hangs Online. This week we're going to be in Genesis again, and this will be us wrapping up Genesis as we go through this cover-to-cover series, and we're trying to see this grand narrative in Scripture. And so we'll be in Genesis 37, and we're going to be looking at the story of Joseph. And so to kind of connect everything, how we got here, last week we were looking at Abraham and Isaac. And so Isaac ended up having 2 sons, Jacob and Esau, and Jacob then had 11 sons. One of them, or the youngest of them, being Joseph. And so we're going to get to look at this story of Joseph. And we see early in chapter 37 that Jacob loved Joseph. He was actually his favorite, and he got this coat of many colors, which was Jacob's way of saying, I love you. I'm going to invest a lot of money in this, because colors were not cheap. Like, we have all these different colors of clothing, like this, even this blue that you have on, Silas, that would have been expensive back in that time. And so the brothers saw this and were like, okay, Dad really does love Joseph a lot. And then they were starting to get jealous of that. And then Joseph is like, hey, had this dream. You guys are going to bow down to me one day, is basically what the dream meant. And the brothers were like, okay, definitely not. I know as an older brother, or as the oldest in the family, if my younger brother was like, hey, you're going to bow down to me, I'd be upset. So Joseph goes out to check on the brothers one day for his father, Jacob, and the brothers plot to kill him. And instead of killing him, they end up throwing him in a pit, and then end up selling him into slavery. And so they sell him to some merchants that are on their way to Egypt, and so they sell him to an Egyptian named Potiphar. And so we see Joseph there. And so, Silas, where does the story go from there?
Yeah, so from there, after he was sold into slavery and through Potiphar, he is in... through his character and just the man of God that he was, he actually ended up rising the ranks and becoming like the head of this household for Potiphar. And through that, Potiphar's wife started like becoming like attracted to him, I guess, and saw him, and she tried to seduce him. And because of the man of God he was, he said, no, like I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't dishonor the Lord and dishonor my master like that. And so when he tried to escape, she grabbed onto his garment, his shirt, and she brought it to Potiphar and said, look, your servant Joseph tried to seduce me. He tried to sleep with me. And so Joseph ended up getting thrown in prison for that, because it made Potiphar angry, of course. And while he was in prison, he met a cupbearer and a baker that were also thrown in prison at the time. And both of them had a dream on the same night. And they went to Joseph, and he interpreted the dreams for them. And basically what happened was the cupbearer got appointed back to his position under Pharaoh, and the baker got hung. And he told the cupbearer, hey, remember me when you get out of prison. And he didn't. He forgot about Joseph. And
for 2 years.
For 2 years. The Bible says 2 whole years passed by. And then Potiphar has a dream, and and then the cupbearer says, that basically, I remember somebody in prison that can interpret dreams. And so he brings him into the house and says, I've had this dream. Can you interpret it for me? And because of, again, who he was, his character, Joseph said, it's not I that's going to interpret this for you, but the Lord.
Yeah, and so what we see is Pharaoh is saying, hey, here's this dream. Joseph interprets it, and basically the interpretation is there's going to be 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of famine. So we've got to get ready. We need to store up food and resources for this time. And Pharaoh likes what Joseph has to say, and so he says, all right, well, it's a great idea, great plan. You run it. I want you to do it. And so we see Joseph goes from being in prison and is appointed to the second hand. He is Pharaoh's right hand man. So he has, we see Pharaoh give him a signet ring. I think this is in chapter 40. We see Pharaoh give him a signet ring, which is this ring that would have had a signature on it. So now Joseph is able to decree orders, or he has the same power that Pharaoh has. And Pharaoh is over all of Egypt. And so we see Joseph at the right hand of Pharaoh, second in command. And so the 7 years of plenty start. They go great. They store up all the stuff. So the famine hits. And so what we see is that Joseph's brothers and his family are in this area that gets hit by the famine. And so word gets back to them that there's plenty of food and resources in Egypt. So the brothers set out, and Joseph immediately recognizes them when they come up, because Joseph is talking to everyone that is coming to get the food and resources. And so he ends up testing them to see if they've changed. He accuses them of being spies and hears them say, we should have never thrown Joseph into the pit or sold him into slavery. And then Joseph has them bring the youngest brother, Benjamin, because Benjamin was born while Joseph was gone. And the brothers, he's doing that to see if the brothers are going to treat Benjamin the same way that they treated him, because Benjamin would have had the same favor that Joseph would have. And so he sees that they're different. And so through a series of a couple different tests in chapters 41 and 42, Joseph ends up revealing himself and says, brothers, I am alive. Is my father alive? And the brothers in their disbelief are like, what is going on? Because it's been roughly 13 years, somewhere between 10 or 13 years since they would have last seen him.
Completely different person.
And so, he would have grown up. He would have been this super mature guy. And so we know that he was about 37 years old when the years of famine started. And so we see the father of Jacob. We see Jacob come in, and the family all come back to Egypt. And Pharaoh, the ruler of all of Egypt, go, whoa, Joseph, you had a family. And we see them, we see Pharaoh welcome them in. And so that's kind of where the story ends, where Joseph's story ends. And so we see that Jacob and his family settle there. And God tells Jacob, I'm going to make a great nation out of you. And to foreshadow some, we'll see that this family of Jacob is the Israelite nation that ends up leaving Egypt at one point. So there are two kind of questions that I want to tackle tonight with you, Silas. And the first question is, where is Jesus in this story? You know, we can see that Joseph is definitely the earthly hero, right? And so when you look at the story of Joseph, where do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as Joseph, or do you see yourself as someone else?
I think the easy, or like not the easy answer, but the answer we'd all like to say is that we're Joseph in the story.
Right.
We're the faithful servant. We're the one that does anything the Lord calls us to do, and we're willing to be patient and wait. But I think oftentimes we really fall into the category of the brothers, where we're jealous, we're envious, and we try to do all these things to prove ourselves instead of just be willing to submit to the plan that the Lord has for us.
And I would agree with that. And so where we see with the first question of where is Jesus, I would make the argument that Joseph is Jesus.
For sure.
Because what we see is Joseph is loved by his father, clothed in royalty, and then rejected by those that he is eventually going to save. Sold into slavery, having to live a life, go through things that he was never meant to do or never deserved. Not that he was never meant, but that he never deserved to go through all that he did. But we see that he rises up to the right hand of the ruler of a kingdom, and it's in that position that he's ultimately going to redeem his family and redeem the ones that he loves. And we see that Jesus does the same thing. Jesus came down and died on the cross and went through a death that he never deserved, but went through it willingly because he loved us. And now he's at the right hand of God over the kingdom of heaven. And he is working on our behalf, and he saves us if we choose to have a relationship with him. And so the second question is, where are we? And Silas, I think you hit it right on the head with, we are the brothers. And so, Silas, why do you think, dive into more of why you would say we're the brothers instead of we're Joseph?
So with Joseph, we see just endless faithfulness
Yeah.
and faithfulness to whoever was his master, faithfulness to the Lord.
Right.
But with the brothers, we see a lot of jealousy.
Yeah.
And we see them saying, well, why can't that be me kind of
Yeah.
thing, even if they're not really saying that. And then you see all the tests eventually that Joseph puts them through, and they prove themselves that they have changed, that they've
Right.
gone through like this amount of time, these so many years, that they've
Right.
changed, and now they're ready for something bigger.
Like a
than that.
redeeming process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think if we look back at chapter 37 specifically, a lot of that jealousy and envy and hatred we see in the brothers, I think we feel that as well.
Yeah.
But keeping in mind that Joseph is a picture of Jesus and that we're the brothers, I think it's important to think about the fact that as the brothers, when we choose to sin, we throw Joseph into the pit.
Yeah.
Every time we throw Joseph into the pit, it can either be that, or every time we sin, we throw Joseph into the pit, or more importantly, we choose to send Jesus to the cross. Because the only reason that Jesus had to die on the cross is because man, Adam, way back in the Garden of Eden, chose to sin.
Yeah.
And we actively choose to sin day in and day out. And that's not something that we can control. Paul makes it very clear that I sin whether I want to or not. Like we are inherently sinful. But we choose to act on temptation, and we choose to throw Joseph in the pit.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think we really see ourselves in this story is every time that we choose to sin, we're throwing Joseph in the pit. And I think that's a really important thing to hold on to, because Joseph still loved his brothers. Joseph still cared about his brothers, just like Jesus still loves us. Even when he was on the cross, feeling this excruciating pain, going through a death he never deserved to die, he still loved us. We were on the forefront of his mind, because he even looks up to God and says, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And so I think the other reason as to why we're the brothers is because it doesn't matter what we do, where we are. It didn't matter what the brothers did. They were always going to end up in front of Joseph again, begging for mercy, begging for help, because of Joseph's dream he had at the beginning of the story, where he says, hey, like, you guys are going to bow down to me. Now, he didn't know what the context was, but Joseph was put over them, and they were going to always come back. Just like no matter what we do, we are going to end up back at the foot of Jesus, at the foot of the cross, at the end of time, because that is how the story, that is what has been told to us, is that Jesus is going to come back and get his bride. And so the question is what is that interaction? What is that moment going to look like for you? Are you going to be the brothers that just choose to cast Joseph away and do nothing? Or are you going to be the changed brothers at the end? At the end of the story, where they know that they're wrong. And so, Silas, what do you think that means for us? Like, as we are trying to figure out for students that are listening, that are like, I don't want to be the brothers at the beginning of the story. I want to be like the brothers at the end of the story. What does that mean? What does that look like for someone like that?
I think the main thing that changed for the brothers is they realized at the end that they needed help. They needed salvation, you could say. And that's a place we all come to at some point. We need to come to where we realize that we can't do this on our own. We've gotten this far on our own, and we can't do it any farther. And we need somebody, Jesus, to step in and save us.
And just in case we haven't been clear, the story of Joseph is very much a very easy parallel of the gospel. It's so clear that, and that's a great way of saying it, of the brothers needed help. They knew they needed help. They knew they couldn't do this on their own. And guys, like, I feel that. Like, I know day in and day out, I am so thankful that I have a relationship with Jesus, because this life is hard enough with Jesus. I could not imagine what it's like without it. Especially as we're coming out of COVID, but also kind of going back into COVID. It's this weird, like, what is going on? I don't understand. And that's how I feel, even as a believer. But I know that I need the help of Jesus, just like the brothers needed the help of Joseph to get through. And so, so how do we get to that point? How do we get to that point of coming to Jesus and saying, I need help? Well, it's really simple. I mean, Paul says in Romans 10, 9 and 10, that if you believe in your heart and confess with your mouth that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it's with the heart that one believes, with the mouth that one confesses. And so we see that it's really that simple. Of all you really need to do is confess that you're a sinner. Confess that you are sinful and separated from God, because you are. That's why Jesus had to die on the cross, because God is perfect and without sin. And so you confess with your heart, but then or confess with your mouth, but then believe in your heart that God raised Jesus from the dead. Because the thing is that if Jesus never raised from the dead, then all this is pointless.
Yeah.
But it takes faith to believe that. And for those that are like, oh, there's no way that can happen, there are about 500 or so people that all first account witnesses that testified that Jesus was alive, that they saw Jesus after he died, or after he rose again from the grave. And we see that early on in the church that people were believing and coming to know Christ in the thousands.
Yeah.
And it's all faith. And I know that's difficult for some of us to believe, but faith is how we get there. And so if you want to know more about that, or if you have questions, you can text TALK to the number that's on the screen. That's TALK to the number on the screen. And we have someone ready to talk to you.
Yeah.
Because this moment where you come to the end of yourself so that Jesus can pick you up is the most important moment you could ever have, because that relationship, that heavenly relationship, is way more important than any earthly relationship.
Yeah, and I would even say, Alec, that a lot of you may be in a position where you're thinking like, I'm too far gone, like the Lord can't save someone like me. But if we go back to that parallel, like these brothers literally sold their brother. They wanted to kill him. They did all these horrible things. But then when they came back before him, he was like just ready to forgive them. He wanted them back in their lives. And Jesus is the exact same way, where no matter what baggage you think you're bringing, what you think you've done in your past, Jesus is waiting, ready to forgive you.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look, you can look in chapters 42, 43, you'll see that Joseph weeps. He's broken that he has to wait to welcome them back, but he had to see that their hearts were changed.
Yep.
And Jesus is the same way.
Yeah.
He wants to welcome us back, but the sin separates us.
Yeah.
And so that's a great point, Silas. So once again, text TALK to the number on the screen if you want to talk to someone, if you have questions. And man, it's been fun, Silas. Thanks for joining us.
Of course.
You guys, thanks for joining us this week, and we'll talk to you next week.